Right. Well, thank you, gentlemen, and I do now want to welcome the following representatives: Mr. Michael Kane from the Transport Workers Union, Mr. Paul Ryan, the National Industrial Advisor from RTO, and Mr. Gordon McKinlay, ex-president and current member of the National Road Freighters Association. So, gentlemen, if you could give your names and the capacity in which you appear today, please.
Gordon McKinlay, board member of the National Road Freighters Association, ex-owner driver, but currently still involved in a business in the transport industry, and certainly an interested party in trying to fix the industry.
Thank you.
Michael Kane, National Secretary of the Transport Workers Union.
Thank you.
Paul Ryan, National Industrial Advisor for the Australian Road Transport Industrial Organisation.
Thank you, gentlemen. You know how this works. I'm going to offer you the opportunity to make opening statements before we go to questions. So who would like to kick off?
I can start if you like.
Yep, Mr. Kane, go.
Thanks, Senators. Thanks, Senator Still. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak to the committee and give evidence that goes to the heart of your inquiry, and that is how we make this industry safe, how we make it sustainable. I'll provide some context for this aim because the committee has already heard and read testimony from our members about what life is like working in the industry. Yep. Some of that evidence, you'll remember, Senators, was absolutely shocking, and I'm sure left you in no doubt that the industry has to undergo some reform. You'll recall hearing from Dave Cullen from Queensland, who rolled his B double, and he spoke about the terrible mental health toll that took on him. You'll remember Darren McCauley from Melbourne. He gave testimony about how many colleagues he lost dead doing the job. You'll also recall Noel Blue, a cash and transit driver from Sydney. He spoke about the hold-ups that he and his workmates have had to endure. The most recent one 2 years ago at Clempton Park, simply because banks, retailers are squeezing literally the life out of that sector, a deadly sector. And the testimony, of course, from those drivers is powerful. But it represents only a sliver of what goes on in our industry. As part of the TWU and our collective, those drivers have the courage and the backing of our entire membership to tell you their stories. But of course, there are many drivers who can't take that brave stance because they literally fear losing their jobs and their livelihoods. And there are many others as well who are simply no longer with us to tell their stories. And again, it brings me no joy, and with a heavy heart, that I report that we are just seeing on the news feeds as we speak that a truck driver has lost their lives at Casula on the M7 only an hour or so ago. A double truck crash on the Casula bypass there at the M7. 183 people, that's the official safe work number of transport workers that have died in the last 5 years just doing their jobs. That's the number of people that should be here telling their stories today. They should be with their families, they should be with their children, they should be with their grandchildren, but they're not. And we mark their deaths, especially today of all days, because it's Workers' Memorial Day. 183 lives. That's the human cost of collecting and delivering our food, our clothes, our oil, fuel and gas, our waste, our building materials, our manufacturing goods. That's the human cost in Australia. Where's the federal government? Are we to assume that that human cost touches them not at all? Where is the Prime Minister? Where is the Industrial Relations Minister? What are they doing in response to this carnage? Surely this must touch them just as it touches every other Australian. And now we have a new horror and a new human cost to contend with in the form of the gig economy. In the space of just a few months last year, 5 food delivery riders lost their lives while working. And we know from safe work investigations that some of them weren't wearing approved safety helmets, not given proper training, and none had the right to workers' compensation. And we know they are paid a pittance, Dr. Belzer. We know they are paid a pittance. the human and actual cost of this new batch of dead transport workers was summed up in the most stark way possible by the sister of one of those deceased, the deceased being Chow Kai-shen, when she said, "My brother's life is gone, and all for the price of a cup of coffee." The others who died in that short period were Ik Wong, Didi Freddy, Biju Paul, and Xiaoxun Chen. We will keep saying their names. We do not believe that Australians are willing to bear this human cost just so that their goods can be delivered. And we don't believe it's right for the federal government to sit on its hands, to wash its hands, and to fail to regulate. Amid the testimony and submissions you've received, Senators, it's important to remember that this is an area which also carries much scientific and academic weight. We just had an incredibly detailed and compelling submission from Dr. Belzer, which I've just sat through. Crucially, that research makes the link between safety and pay, proving that when there's financial pressure imposed on transport operators and drivers, safety gets compromised and people die. This goes back as far as the 1980s and 1990s, this research. Research in 1990 by Hensher and Ballatino. 10 years later, and Beyond the Midnight Oil, that was a commissioned report of the House of Reps Standing Committee on Communications and Transport. That was a coalition-dominated report. It concluded that the risks are compounded by the commercial imperative on transport operators to maximise the return on their investment, the demands of customers, and by the pressures this places on transport workers to undertake longer hours with fewer rest breaks. A coalition government. And I want to say this. I want to put this on the record. There are coalition members, and have been, of this House that have strongly supported the need to regulate. Senators and members who have stood up and said their piece against the party political line. We won't forget them, and we're asking them to stand up again now. Just as there has been an absolute commitment across the political divide in New South Wales to put in place and maintain provisions protecting owner drivers in that state across 40 years. Bipartisan. That's what we need. That's what we need. To be bipartisan, those members, Prime Minister, the Industrial Relations Minister and the Transport Minister, have to get off their backsides and stop this carnage. Then in 2008, we had the National Transport Commission report, which brought together all of this evidence up to that point. And in 2016, this federal government itself, in the very reports it used to tear down the Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal, those reports too were filled with this evidence linking pay and economic pressures to safety. The PricewaterhouseCoopers report said that the road transport order and payments order that was controversial or made controversial for political reasons back in 2016 resulted in a 10% and 18% reduction in the number of crashes. This is the government's own report. And that report, though, called for the abolition because of cost. It said it was a significant cost to the economy. The tribunal was a significant cost to the economy. And that outweighed any potential safety benefits. Well, try telling that to the family of the person who's just died on the M7, the 58 that died in 2019, the 183 that have died in the last 5 years, and the hundreds of Australians that die with them in those crashes each and every year. Try telling that to them. The tribunal had an annual budget of $4 million. The cost of truck crashes to the national economy is $4.64 billion. Those two figures speak for themselves. PricewaterhouseCoopers report wasn't looked at on a face value of what it said. It was cherry-picked to support a political moment in time, one of the most reprehensible actions ever taken by a government. And it's led to people dying on our roads. This research, this body that we've heard about, what we've just heard from Dr. Belzer, proves that the underlying reasons for truck crashes and the devastating effect of low contracts are really what we need to be addressing here. And anyone who says that there is no link, anyone who says there is no link, espousing that view, they really are friends of the Flat Earth Society or the harmful anti-vaxxers. They're deniers. They're denying in the face of empirical evidence. The TWU believes the way to reform this industry, the way to make it safe and sustainable, is to make sure that those at the top of supply chains are accountable. The wealthy retailers, manufacturers, oil companies, banks, they can help determine what this industry looks like in a positive way if they are held to account. Because failing to hold them account means that they just continue to reap profit, unjustly taking money out of this industry, and it's literally killing people. And the current push by clients to lower standards isn't going to continue at the current pace. It's going to ramp up. It's going to attract a galloping speed because of the gig economy. It's aggressively entering our markets, operating at a loss for years if necessary to undercut competition and wipe it out. Amazon's already doing this with Amazon Flex, getting people to use their own vehicles. We've observed family cars in this operation loaded up with boxes so that drivers can't even see out the window. They're paid about $10 an hour after costs. Their safety induction is a 2-minute video on the app. Is it any wonder that this Senate committee is hearing such meaningful evidence about the need for change? And Amazon and Uber Freight, they're coming in. They're coming in like a tsunami. And we have to act. I'm so heartened to be joined here today by two of the industry bodies the TWU is working closely with on pushing for change in our industry. Myself and Gordon McKinley, Gordo, of the National Road Freighters Association. 5 years ago, we thought we were on opposing sides of the trucking debate. But we realised what we have in common. We both recognise the deep unfairness in the system, the squeeze on transport operators by the big clients whose profit continues to grow. And our two organisations now have signed an MOU committed to fighting for change. An RTO whose members are fighting fiercely to keep good standards in trucking despite intense pressures from the economic clients. We're very different organisations, but we all know that unless the dynamics at the top of the industry are addressed, then trucking operators and drivers will forever be playing catch up. The TWU works with other industry bodies serious about reform. But to those who stand in our way, to those proposing meaningless voluntary codes and pursuing, cosy political deals with the federal government, allowing them to pretend they have our industry on side but doing nothing, we say this: get out of our way, because there are lives and livelihoods at risk, and this reform agenda that we're talking about today is too serious for jokers and charlatans. The TWU has been vocal in calling for the re-establishment of an independent tribunal capable of investigating and addressing the underlying causes of risks. In short, capable of holding companies at the top who are reaping profits and economic benefit, hold them to account. It's a big, brave, bold thing to do, but it's something we have to do. And if we don't do it now, before the gig economy tsunami hits road freight, we may never be able to achieve our common aim of a safe and sustainable industry. Senators, the lives of transport workers and the lives of people who use our roads depend on action right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. Now, Mr. Ryan or Mr. McKinley, do you wish to... Look, I'll stop the formalities. We've all known each other for years. All right, who am I fooling? Paul or Gordo, do you want to do an opening statement? And are you happy to be filmed?
Sorry?
Are you happy to be filmed?
Only from this side.
Yeah, that's... Trust me. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that is your better side. Yeah, okay, you're all clear, mate. You just got to check with us before you come in, just in case someone has a problem. Paul.
Thank you. And hello, Professor Belzer. We haven't been able to see each other for a while. I'm the National Industrial Advisor for the Australian Road Transport Industrial Organisation. We're the registered organisation of employers that represent everyone who employs in the transport industry, from the larger companies down to the smaller mum and dad operators. I've been in this industry coming up now for 35 years. Over half my life I've spent in the transport industry. It's an industry that runs this country. And I think it's something that we look back over the last 12 months when the pandemic hit, and in Victoria we were locked down, but the transport industry kept going. It kept the country running. And the politicians, both from the House and the Senate, came out and thanked the transport industry many, many times. But now that we're moving out of the pandemic, we're back to arguing the same old things that we've been arguing since 1988, when I first, after I'd spent a couple of years in the industry. Where are the politicians now when we need them to provide protection and support for the transport industry? We supported the country, give us a little bit back. Where is the Minister for Transport? Oh, sorry, Senator, there is no Minister for Transport. Where is the Minister for Training? Oh, there's no Minister for Training at the federal level. As Professor Belzer pointed out, and as Mr. Kane pointed out, there are many instances where the transport industry needs training and needs assistance in that area. But we are unable to do that, to work that through at the federal level, because there are no responsible authorities to help us. And if nothing else, if nothing more comes out of this inquiry, at least we get some basis of an apprenticeship system to move into the transport industry. In Professor Belzer's presentation, he talked about the collection of data for transport statistics and injuries. In Australia, that's all done at state level. So we don't have a consistent method of measuring those issues. I mean, Mr. Kane's talked about the number of deaths on the roads from truck drivers. That's one measure, but it's all the other accidents, incidents that cause problems and cost money. So again, I think we need to look at establishing something at the federal level that can collect data, collect that information. I urge all of you senators to read the submission we put in, which was written back in 2019. But I just want to reiterate a couple of points that were made in that. There's currently a review of heavy vehicle national law. When heavy vehicle national law was first passed in this country, there were 4 pages of it. There are now 738 pages of it. And we have a review that's been going on for 2 years and will probably deliver nothing. We suggest the establishment of a Transport Standards Inspectorate to provide appropriate and necessary enforcement mechanisms around the employment engagement of workers in the road transport industry. This body needs to be able to investigate commercial contracts to ensure proper and fair standards are in place and followed by all participants in the supply chain. So when something's contracted down 2, 3, 4 times and everyone takes their clip, that the person down the bottom of that chain, whether it be a transport company or an owner-operator, is paid a fair rate for the job that they're doing. The transport industry has always been an adopter of new technologies, and in the late 80s when B-doubles were introduced, the increased productivity, which was around about 50%, was passed straight back to the customers, not to the transport companies, back to the customers in terms of lower prices. Those lower prices, did they flow through to what Australian citizens pay for their goods and services, goods and other products in supermarkets and hardware stores? No, not really. So RTO supports a review of the adequacy and efficacy of the legislative and institutional framework, especially around employment law, particularly as it relates to the gig economy. I've already covered off on apprenticeship and where appropriate retraining into the road transport industry. The final point I want to make is we need a formal consultative mechanism between the road transport industry and all levels of government to ensure that required infrastructure is identified, planned and built to benefit the Australian economy. We suggest the establishment of a National Road Transport Consultative Council comprised of government at all levels and registered organisations which represent the industrial interests of prime contractors, employers and workers in the industry. There are other national consultative bodies. This body needs to be established. There are other national consultative bodies in other industries. For instance, there is still a National Labour Consultative Council. But we need to be able to plan, and if we're going to have intermodal transport that, and we're going to build an inland rail line, that it connects with the road transport side of things, that it enables efficient movement of freight from one mode to another mode. I've been around long enough, and the last major railway line built in this country was between Alice Springs and Darwin, and it mostly carries people on a train called the Garn. Not a lot of freight. So if we're going to do it, let's do it with proper planning through a National Road Transport Consultative Council comprised of government at all levels. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Mr. McKinlay.
Thanks, Senator. Most people who know me probably scratch their head and wonder why I'm sitting here today next to Michael. 5 years ago, almost to the day, a little bit over, I led a fight that came to Canberra here, to Parliament House, and had the Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal annulled. And the reason we did that was not because we're idiots and we didn't want to be paid properly. It was unfortunately not very well managed. The Act was not managed properly by the tribunal, and we saw, we had a fight or flight situation, and most of us were in debt and we couldn't flight, so we had to fight. And that is what we did, and I'm still very proud of what we did. 5 years later, I'm sitting next to Michael here, who I think we've got a fairly good relationship now. Michael reached out to me about 18 months ago on another visit to Parliament House, and Glenn actually rang me the day before, Senator Sterl rang me the day before and asked if I'd meet with Michael, and I did, and I realised that we've actually got a lot in common. And that is that, we both love the transport industry, and we both want to see people that work very, very hard in an absolutely essential service. And I always say that this should be recognised as an essential service, not to take anything away from firefighters or people that drive ambulance, work in ambulance service. They are dependent on us. At the end of the day, the fire reels, the petrol that goes in those fire tankers in those ambulances, the defibrillators, the everything that the police need to do their job, everything is put on a truck. The old saying, the only thing that's not delivered by a truck is a baby. And it's so true. And we, as an industry, we don't get the respect we deserve. As was mentioned in the pandemic, it was great. We were treated with a lot more respect because people could see that, how much we were needed. And I'd like to point out and congratulate the transport industry for As far as I know, there was absolutely no COVID transmission due to transport industry movements. Now, we move all over the country. Now, we took it pretty serious, very seriously, and we did a bloody good job of controlling that. And we're still looked at as an industry as, we're in the way. We're in traffic trying to negotiate traffic through, inner Sydney in a 26 metre long 65 tonne truck to bring your, bottle of water that just came 600 bloody miles because you couldn't get out of the tap to your supermarket. But because you need to get little Johnny to soccer practice, we're in your road. We're in the road until all of a sudden there's a pandemic and you've got nothing on the shelf to, pardon the expression, to wipe your butt. Literally, all of a sudden we were very, very needed. And I think as an industry, all we want, is to be recognised for that and paid what we deserve. Now, since 2016, I've sold my trucks. My business still works in the transport industry very much so. Still work very long hours, still work very hard, still love it. I'm involved with trucks every day, just in a different role. People say, well, why did you do that? I made a business decision because I saw every month what was coming in and what was going out was less. There was less coming in than was going out, and it was getting worse and worse and worse because fuel could vary. In my time of owning trucks, doing the same work pretty much, fuel varied 50 cents a litre. 50 cents a litre on a single truck doing Sydney-Melbourne so the average Australian truck doing Sydney-Melbourne, 220,000 kilometres a year, 2.2 kilometres per litre average. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to work out that every cent fuel varies is a variance in your bottom line at the end of the year of $1,000. Fuel varies 50 cents a litre, and that puts a difference in your bottom line of $50,000. Have a guess, Senator Sterle, how much the income for that same truck varied that year? Zero. Nothing. Oh, well, hang on. We've got big companies, I won't mention them now, but anyone who does work for them will know that are still running at the moment a negative fuel charge. Fuel's that cheap in their mind that they can take money away from our rate to put back in their pocket because fuel's so darn cheap. Well, that's just rubbish. It's not right. Listening to the learned doctor there before, I actually just came up with a bit of a brainwave, and one of the things that we've started this discussion within our association a lot of times about how would you set up a charging regime to do it. The answer is very hard. I work in a segment of the industry in log trucks where your maintenance costs are just through the roof. Your fuel consumption is abhorrent, and that compares very different to someone running down the Hume Highway in a single truck. So you obviously can't do that. The professor just mentioned it's something that he said, and it clicked in my mind, was you could have a segmented, I think the term he used was a freight unit. So, I immediately, a thing went off in my head and I'm like, hey, a freight unit, okay, so a single transport running the Hume Highway or the Pacific Highway, per kilometre is one transport unit. We work out what that's worth, and that's what the legal rate has to be paid. It's pretty simple. You've got a B double, that's 1.5 transport units. You have to be paid that. You're pulling a B double load of logs out of, the bottom of Lankeys Creek to Tumbarumba, that's 5 transport units if that's what it has to be, and you're paid accordingly. Taking into account some of these, the logs again, for example, or tippers, a lot of this work, the vehicles are running one way empty, so that can be factored into the transport unit. I think that is something that it's just a light bulb that's gone off this morning to me. How do we do it? I've been trying to figure out with so many of my colleagues for the last 5 years, how do we figure it out? I think there's something in that. We need people a lot smarter than me to work it out, but we also need people that have sat at the Bowser and put their own fuel in trucks, that have paid the $7,000 a year registration just for a single prime mover out of their own pocket. So many things that have been our association has put forward to government that they just simply don't want to answer. I've travelled to, I live on the Victorian border. I've travelled to Rockhampton to meet with ministers from the government, and it was a total waste of time. I should have just stayed at work. We get nothing out of it. I can ring these ministers up now and they wouldn't know who I am, and I've met them several times. I ring Michael or Glenn and I'm very cheerfully met with, "G'day Gordo, how you going, mate?" What people ask, well, what are you doing working with the TWU, or what are you doing talking to a Labor senator? I'll tell you what I'm doing talking to them. I'm trying to get something done for this country, and they're the only people that are listening, and I thank you for listening. And we need to stop. You don't have to be a rocket scientist for this. We're not making money out of transport. The best operators are not making money out of transport, and whilst the wage thing is important, you can't get blood out of a stone. The person who owns the vehicle has to be remunerated properly. That can filter down to the driver, and so it should filter down to the drivers, but it should also filter down to the fact that the person who owns that company can give that driver a very safe, modern workplace to work in. I think that's very important that we try and get to that point. Just one other thing I would like to say, just going back to 2016, I've had a lot of knockers of what we did. None of those knockers have continued the fight and tried to make anything right. For 5 years now, it doesn't affect me one bit. This has actually cost me money today to come here and do this. I could just be at work, working, running my business, but I'm not, because it's the right thing to do to come here. Now, I think at the very, very least, the government needs to respect the fact that people like myself are trying to, we at our own cost, trying to make things better. Listen to us. When you go to make these decisions on how these things are done, consult us, the real people that actually know what we're talking about. Not, I won't even go there. We need proper consultation from people within the industry, and most importantly, anything that we can get through legislation to give a minimum rate, if you'd like, or to regulate the industry, which is what I think is what needs. We need to regulate the industry. Has to be for every single freight movement, and that's if it's not your product that you're putting on the truck and it's a commercial movement of freight, it has to be paid whether you're a company of 500 trucks or you're a mum and dad operation with one truck. That's what needs to happen. And let's look into the freight unit thing. I think that's got some real merit. That's just a light bulb moment, and I'm happy to give my time and experience and to consult on that to help work that out if it should go that far. And once again, thanks for asking the questions, Senator. It's at least someone is. Thank you.
Well, Mr. McKinlay, thank you very much. Well, let's roll our sleeves up, and I know the timetable says 15:15, but you're not getting out of here at 15:15. I'll just let you know. Now, what we have here is a number of things. We've got the majority of industry, and I'll stand corrected here if anyone wants to carve me up on this. The majority of industry in this nation, the representatives are saying it can't go on the way it is. So, how lifting it is to see both sides of the industrial fence sitting together, the majority of the industrial fence sitting here saying something has to be done. I'm buoyed by the support of the state organisations. What a magnificent job the state organisations have done to keep this issue front and centre. And when you have the union, you have the National Road Freighters Association, there will be the ATA and Nat Roads, and livestockies will talk for themselves. They will see where that goes. And the state organisation saying, stop, we've got to fix this. Now, how, I can tell you now, Gordo, just to answer your question, anything can be done in this nation if the political will is there. The political will is not here in this nation at this stage. So I'd be very keen to see who talks to the ministers and what they actually get out of the minister, because I sit there thinking this is just a circle. It's just an absolute joke. No one listens to the voices of the men and women who are representing the men and women holding the steering wheel or paying the exorbitant fuel rates and the registrations and the truck payments from the one who's got 7,000 trucks to the one who's got one truck. So I've had my little rant. Now, come to you, Mr. Kane, then I'm going to come to you, Mr. Ryan, to talk about a Minister for Transport, because this piques my interest here. So, let's, and good, I will come back to you. In terms of the no link between remuneration and safety, we have had a couple of submissions, I have had, this committee, where one fellow in West Australia said it's all bulldust. That is my words, not his. There is no link, because if we pay our drivers more, they won't spend it on their trucks, you know. I mean, so I thought, well, why don't I give this chance, the bloke the chance to come and defend himself. He scattered like a frightened rabbit. There you go. Let's talk a little bit more about the link between remuneration and safety. We know, we've heard from Dr. Balzar, we know the fine work from Professor Quinlan. Your experience, Mr. Kane, you represent many drivers and owner-drivers. How far off are we, and where are the voices that come and argue against me?
Well, I think that the weight of evidence is before this committee. It's evidence that stacks up over around about 35 years. Most importantly, going to the political question, it's evidence that's been supported on a bipartisan basis as well. So we're at a point in time, Senator, I agree, where there doesn't, under this current government at this point anyway, seem to be the political will to act. Of course, we're hopeful that this committee will put before the government a report that sets out the urgency, the need to act. But it's not as if this hasn't been thought through before, and when it has been thought through and when there's been genuine discussions, you are able to attract bipartisan support, as we've done in New South Wales for 50 years, as we did in the lead up to the establishment of the Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal. Now, the link between pay and safety is proven, and it's proven not only by academic evidence, coronial inquiries, judicial determinations, government inquiries. Importantly, on that later point, it was proved in the government inquiry, the government papers that were used to justify the abolition of the Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal. So this is not something that you can skirt around. This is a fact. But what does that actually mean? We've had Professor Belzer today take us through it. There is report after report which sets out pages and pages of this evidence. But what does that actually mean? What it means is that if you, as Belzer said, if you pay drivers appropriately and deal with slabs of unpaid working time, there will be less pressure on workers to stay on the road longer, for them to drive faster, for them to resort to the use of artificial stimulants to stay awake, to try and dodge around systems. We've heard about the logbooks, etc., limiters, whatnot, because there will be a level of earnings that sustains livelihoods. That's the fact. But the most important thing about what's before this Senate is what Gordo has said and what Paul has said as well, in different ways from their own constituency, and that is you've got to support the companies that are engaging the workers. You don't get better pay, payment for working time, better conditions, unless the companies that are paying those workers have the economic wherewithal to pay them. And that, of course, means that you have to hold to account those who are reaping the economic benefit in the industry, that is those at the very top of our supply chains. At the moment, we have notionally in our country a concept of chain of responsibility. I say notionally because chain of responsibility was originally intended to include the economics, what transport operators are paid and therefore what they can flow through to workers. But it mutated over time. It mutated to deal only with the consequences: speeding, fatigue, logbooks. These are consequences of that pressure. So it's like saying, let's put a Band-Aid wherever we see a problem. Let's take a bit of cough mixture to fix the sore throat instead of figuring out what is it that gives us a sore throat in the first place. That's what the evidence before this committee has done. You have the recipe for putting in place attacking the causes here. And we are absolutely mystified as to why there would be voices opposing it. If there are employer voices opposing this proposal to deal with these economic pressures, then they have been corrupted in one way or another. And I use that word in both its pure term and its extended term, because there's no justification for it. Because if you really support employers, you support staving off the tsunami of the gig economy. The gig economy wipes out employers. So if you're an employer association sitting before this Senate inquiry later in the day, you want to think very carefully about what you're saying. Because if what you're saying is that we don't need support, then you're essentially writing the death warrant for the members that you purportedly represent. We've got to support good employers, and the employment relationship is completely bypassed by the gig economy, and that means employers are gone. And we need employers because they are a potential moderating factor. They are the glue that keeps the whole show on the road, literally, and we've got to support them. That's what we need to do, senators, and we've got to make sure that we don't get confused between enforcement and standard setting. Yes, we need good enforcement. Of course we do, and there's a whole range of reasons why it's not good at the moment. But you've got to have a body to set the standards that are to be enforced. And that's what's missing. We need a standards-setting body, one that has the power to hold those with the economic grunt to account so they can pay employers properly, so we can stave off the gig economy tsunami, and so that flows down to drivers so they're paid properly and they stop dying.
Yeah, and I will come back to that with Mr. Kane, because it infuriates me. I've been saying this at every inquiry I've had with the, and Mr. Ryan, you would be all over this too. We have a number of standards in this nation in terms of enterprise agreed rates and everywhere in between, and then we have the basic award rates, and the award rates, in my words, are just absolutely disgraceful. But we've also got those that aren't paying to the award, and we've got sham contracting out there. That is right, sham contracting, I should say. You only have to go to Seek and see all the grubs on there, asking for drivers to bring ABNs. And I always say this to all my colleagues in the state associations: these people are stealing bread off the table of your family and your employees. And I don't know why anyone would want to run a protection racket for anyone who's doing the wrong thing. But in this nation, there's pretty good reward if you break the laws and get away with it. Mr. Ryan, you talked about a Minister for Transport, and I know that was mentioned in Melbourne the other day. Why a Minister for Transport? What's wrong with the setup we've got now?
Transport constitutes, there are different figures, but somewhere around 12 to 14% of the Australian economy. Imagine if we'd had a Minister of Transport during the pandemic, we may have been able to cross borders without having to go through, I think Queensland issued 24 different border notices. At one stage, you could not cross into the South Australian border unless you could prove you'd had a COVID test within the last 7 days.
Yeah.
If you're a Victorian driver, you could not get a COVID test unless you displayed the symptoms. So you're either going to be illegal in South Australia, or to go and ask for a test in Victoria, you're illegal. Now, maybe if we had somebody who was dealing with transport as a whole, we could deal with those border problems. Unfortunately, Senator, it's easier to drive a truck across Europe than it is across Australia at times. Even time is counted differently. You can be legal driving in Queensland, then you go into New South Wales, you can be illegal, and then you come back into Victoria and you can be legal again because of the way the state bureaucracies determine how they need to amend the National Heavy Vehicle Law to suit their particular needs. And as you know, the National Heavy Vehicle Law doesn't flow through to Western Australia and the Northern Territory. I mean, all we're doing when our forefathers built a railway line between Sydney and Albury, they didn't match it up with the one that was built between Albury and Melbourne. And we are still dealing with that problem. Imagine, senators, if the aviation industry was treated like the road transport industry. So imagine, Senator Stirl, you're coming from Western Australia, from Perth to Melbourne, and the plane stops in the South Australian border and it gets dragged across because that's what the pilot's got to do. He's got to have his COVID test. That's what happens to us. That's what happens in the road transport industry. It is ridiculous. So we need somebody at the federal level, a Minister for Transport, who can deal with these issues from a transport-related perspective.
Yep. Okay, Mr. Ryan, thanks for that. Now let's go back to this. Questions goes to all of you. You mentioned it too, Mr. Ryan, when you said we need a road transport council. On that, when you're talking about a Minister for Transport, I do wonder what happens at TIC meetings, but that's another question. A road transport council, like a national consultative body, what do we got now?
Well, to my knowledge, we have state ministers who get together with whoever the federal counterpart might be, and they talk about issues and refer matters to the National Transport Commission and sometimes the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator. I'm not sure that the current model works, Senator Stirl.
So with that, do the state ministers come and consult you, because they're probably not from the trucking industry?
At state level, yes, you have discussions, consultations with state ministers. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't.
No, sorry, Mr. I'm saying, but do they ring you up? Do they ring the state associations and say, "Oh, we've got a National Transport Council, we've got a tick going on, we need to consult. What's the problems here in our state?"
We're going to go into consultation through COVID with.
Am I aware of the COVID one?
Yep, but aside from that, no, not really.
And of course, from a registered organisation of employees' perspective, the TWU in the transport industry, unfortunately, politics seems to intervene as well, and we know of forums that others have been invited to that we simply haven't been, and of course that excludes experience, but also an incredibly important voice, an experienced voice in the workers that we represent, to be able to come before and make a difference. So it's clearly not working. There is great confusion in our federation, senators, about the difference between enforcement in transport and standard setting. And I'll keep making this point. Enforcement is about dealing with a breach after it's occurred. It's a post-breach. We're in a post-breach culture. And we'll always need that, because people have to be accountable when they've done the wrong thing. And no one's arguing about that. But increased enforcement is not an answer. It just begs the question. What we need is a standard-setting body. There needs to be broad consultation about it. There needs to be voices that represent the entirety of the industry, and regional Australia. There needs to be a standard-setting body that has the power to actually make a difference.
Well, let's talk about the standard-setting body, and to the three of you, okay, so feel free. What would it look like? Who would be on it? What would its job be?
I think it needs to have real people from within the industry as well as, you know, there's the academic side of the industry as well, but I attend a lot of things like this, I suppose, industry type meetings and whatnot, and it's certainly not uncommon for me to be the only person in that room that knows how to drive a heavy vehicle, and these people are deciding the future of people that drive heavy vehicles. And I'm not knocking anyone who doesn't know how to drive a heavy vehicle, and I'm sure there's people that don't drive heavy vehicles that try their very, very best. But at the end of the day, if you were going to ask me about, if you wanted to go and ask someone about how to perform, you know, heart surgery, I wouldn't be the person to come to because I've never done it. So why would you come and ask me?
Yep, that's a fair question. It reflects this parliament too. There's a lot of experts in transport in this building, I can tell you.
You know what an expert is, don't you, Glenn?
Yeah.
What needs to happen, Senator, is that there needs to be a conclusion reached as to what such a standard-setting body would do. Once you've articulated what it needs to do to make a difference, that is to address the underlying causes that are leading to all of these symptoms, then you can better shape how it should look. We have the learnings from the Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal. Gordo's already spoken about that, and some of the failings of the implementation of that. We should learn from that. But the key driver of how this should look and who should be on it should be what is it that it needs to do. And what it needs to do is it needs to have the power to make sure that those with the commercial clout at the top of transport supply chains are actually enforcement in transport.
We need somebody at the federal level, a minister for
industry and regional Australia, there needs to be a standard-setting body that has the power to actually make a difference.
Well, let's talk about the standard-setting body, and to the three of you, okay, so feel free. What would it look like? Who would be on it? What would its job be?
I think it needs to have real people from within the industry as well as, you know, there's the academic side of the industry as well, but I attend a lot of so why would you come and ask?
Has already spoken about that, and some of the failings of the implementation of that. We should learn from that. But the key driver of how this should look and who should be on it should be what is it that it needs to do. And what it needs to do is it needs to have the power to make sure that those with the commercial clout at the top of transport supply chains are actually using that commercial clout to induce an upward spiral of standards and safety, not a downward spiral. And for so long as they are scot-free, that will happen. And this is not something that can be on the back burner. We have Amazon and Uber literally crossing into our territory now, and not just pushing down rates, but abolishing employers altogether, bypassing them, giving out work via apps and the internet to the lowest common denominator. And there needs to be something to put in place to stop them doing it. Otherwise, RTO won't exist, employees won't exist, and we're going to have the symptoms increase and worsen.
Yep. And Mr. Ryan, with your 35 years experience, I'm sure you could add a bit more to that too.
Thank you, Senator. Firstly, any such body should be independent, and it must be independently established under its own piece of legislation or regulation. I go back to the old days when the Industrial Relations Commission had various tribunals set up within it, the Flight Crew Officers Tribunal, the Coal Mining Tribunal. That model seemed to work pretty well. The Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal was set up within the Fair Work Commission, or what is now the successor to the Australian Industrial Relations Commission. But it should be set up and as I said, be independent and have some statutory support behind it. It must, as Gordon said, it must have industry people providing input and expertise. It needs to be headed by someone with probably judicial protection, who can work in a manner that is without favour to those people who might make submissions, because that's how society operates. People put forward ideas, people put forward submissions, and then decisions are made. I think it needs to be able to cross state borders, so it has to be done at a federal level. It has to be done at a federal level. I mean, it's pointless, you know, when you look at some of the issues that have arisen at the state level during the pandemic, but it has national implications. You know, we saw Western Australia shut down for 3 days last weekend. You know, that has national implications.
Yeah.
So it has to be able to deal with stuff, with issues on a national basis.
So is it agreed across the table here that the representation, obviously from employers, obviously from owner drivers, obviously from drivers, are we missing anything? Should there be, you know, if it gets too cumbersome, then there's every reason why you can't do everything. Is there any other thoughts around that?
Probably somebody like Professor Bells is an American, I understand that, but there are Australians who work in that space who understand the labour econometrics around the transport industry. You know, Professor Bells is, some of his equations I didn't quite understand.
You weren't alone.
Thank you, Senator.
Confess.
But we need that degree of expertise as well. I mean, picking up on Gordon's point, the transport unit or the freight unit that Professor Belzer talked about.
Well, and so that, and Gordo, did you want to add anything before, because I am watching the clock, in terms of who should, what the makeup should be?
I think we've probably got most of that pretty well nailed. One thing I'll ask is, where is the NHVR in all this, and why, you know, we've got this this thing that came out several years ago that we've all heard about, which is the chain of responsibility. How come it just keeps stopping at the driver, and that was meant to stop that, right? And I've asked, the National Road Freighters Association has a very good working relationship with the NHVR, and that's something that I hope continues. But at the same time, when I don't believe they're on song, I'll let them know. And I'd like to let them know, which I have done in the past, that I don't think they're on song because they keep dodging the fact that I believe they must have some ability as the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator. They keep telling me they don't make the laws, they regulate them. So as the regulator, when someone steps outside of a chain of responsibility, they can do something about it. Well, how about when someone's been paid $1,100 to carry a load of freight from Sydney to Melbourne in their truck, and they have to tip $600 worth of fuel into it and pay the bloke who sat in the seat $500, and they've got no money left for anything else, that they regulate and do something about it. And they're just dodging. It's just all too hard. Well, you know what? Have a go at it.
All right, well, they'll be here tomorrow. I'm not sure they'll be listening in, but let me just say this is a chain of responsibility. I remember talking about that in the early 90s, and sadly that's just been an absolute, it's just been a complete and utter letdown. We thought it was a silver bullet. It's not the silver bullet, it's the truckies getting pinged all the time. Anyway, that failed. So here we go again. 30 years, I've been doing this for 40 odd years actually, and it's starting to hurt, banging me out against this wall. Gentlemen, can I thank you very much for your time before you do go? And I know that there are many people listening into this, and if anyone says, about if they want to argue about the no link between safety and remuneration, I actually speak from experience as an owner driver running between Perth and Darwin. I was with one of the big trucking companies. I got paid by the kilometre. We didn't have fatigue management, and crikey, there wasn't enough hours in the day. Did I make a good living? My bloody oath, because we go out and strike every couple of years to get our pay up. Was I safe on the road? Well, be damned I was. Let's just leave it at that.
Phil, can I make...
Oh, sorry, Senator Hanson. Yes, please.
Yeah. Look, thank you for your evidence today, gentlemen. Senator Still will tell you, I haven't really been involved in the trucking industry very much at all. It's just over the period of time, since I've come back into Parliament, that I've actually taken a bit of an interest in it. But you only keep reiterating what I have been hearing about your safety records, about the drivers that are dying, that nothing's been done about it. We don't have a National Road Transport Authority to actually deal with it, crossing borders, the changes from state to state. In your opinion, who's standing in the way of this? You must have some idea. Is it big business? Is it the multinationals? Is it free trade agreements? You must have some idea why this is not proceeded and why politicians it's falling on deaf ears.
That's a good question. Who'd like to kick off there?
I'd like to say that it was probably a big part of it is big business and their dealings with the governments of the day, and that's, you know, possibly on both sides of the fence as we change political leadership in this country from time to time. It's certainly not something that's just popped up, but I believe that big business, you know, does contribute to the larger parties, let's say, and you know, are known to hedge a bet each way, but leading up to an election, and
Yeah.
you know, I think you no doubt you've seen that yourself, and yeah, so that's certainly a big one, I think.
Senator
Yes.
Hanson.
You spoke about... Yeah, sorry, go on.
Sorry, Senator Hanson. I just wanted to say that it is a really important question that you've asked, and I think that I don't want to dodge the question because I could give you a politically charged answer, but that's not helpful. I think what we're really focused on now is that there does need to be urgent change. Your question's important because it goes to who do we need to move to make that change, and I think that employers right across as our submission on the table today and workers have come to a very urgent conclusion that it's not just the state of the industry as it has been now over the last 20 years that's a problem. It's the gig economy that's coming to wipe out even good employers, and that makes this even more urgent and makes answering your question more urgent. I'm mystified as to why this federal government is turning a blind eye to this, and any suggestions that anyone has about what we can say to make a difference and to turn that around is most welcome.
All right, then I want to ask you a question. You raised about the ABNs, of drivers just turning up with their ABNs. Now, I know that the government hands out ABNs to people, not just in the trucking drivers, that type of thing, to anyone that comes from overseas who applies for an ABN. They hand it out like confetti. So therefore, we don't know their ability or their experience. And they're then, correct me if I'm wrong, that are they tested for their ability to drive these trucks? Because I've heard too often of people who are foreign workers in this country driving trucks that actually drive it into tunnels and end up getting stuck there. They don't have the ability or the knowledge how to drive on our roads. Is that a big problem?
Senator, your observations are mostly correct. With respect to ABNs, an employer cannot hire someone with an ABN to drive a truck unless they are bringing some capital equipment, such as a truck, to the business relationship. So if I'm simply an employee with an ABN, the employer is breaching tax law, the employer is breaching industrial law, the employer is breaching workers' compensation laws, and the person who turns up with an ABN is breaching tax law as well. That happens. Sham contracting is rife, might be too strong a word, but we're well aware that there are many companies out there who engage subcontinental drivers who may have transferred a driving licence and then told the relevant state authority that they'd driven a truck on the subcontinent, and then their licence is immediately upgraded. And, you know, that is, in simple terms, stupid, but it happens.
Yep. Now I'm wrapping up. Sorry,
Yeah,
not
okay,
wrapping
no,
up,
that's
but
fine. No.
Gordo, no, sorry, Senator Hanson. No, Mr. McKinlay did want to add. I'm not wrapping you up. I'm just the line of question.
Look, I was just going to say that, yeah, most certainly your observations are correct. It's pretty straightforward. If you're going to drive a large vehicle down the road, you should be tested and certified that you know how to do that. I had driving to where I carry out my work the other day. I had an incident with a driver of the description we've used, and I actually got this bloke that he was able to pull up, and when I approached him about the problem, which was the fact that he was blinding me with his lights continuously, he did not know how to dip the headlights on the vehicle he was driving down the Hume Highway. 4,000 trucks a day use the Hume Highway. It's Australia's main street, the busiest road in Australia. This bloke is driving a B-double on that road and is unable to dip the headlights to low beam, and he has been licensed. That is the problem.
It is a big problem. Just one last question. What has been done about doing a national road compliance for states? Now, I know it's a huge, big problem. What has been done over the years to actually push this, that we have a national legislation or regulation on trucking from going over border line, going over the borders?
We have National Heavy Vehicle Law, which was an attempt about 10 years ago to harmonise laws so that they were identical in each state, but each state, so the heavy vehicle law is passed by the Queensland Parliament, and then it's adopted in the other state parliaments. Western Australia and Northern Territory aren't part of the heavy vehicle national law scheme. The law passed in Queensland is about 98% has been 98% passed in New South Wales, about 97% passed in Victoria, about 96% in Tasmania. So people say, well, we have a heavy vehicle national law. It's the 2 and 3% that create the problems, Senator Hanson. So if we're going to have national heavy vehicle law, let's have national heavy vehicle law. Let's not have 5 or 6 different versions of national heavy vehicle law. Let's make it.
So you're telling me it's up to the states then to decide whether they want to take up that national heavy vehicle law. So
Yeah.
It's up to states.
Yes.
And it hasn't been pushed by the federal government to actually bring it all under one law.
They've maybe attempted to push it, but if they had a Minister for Transport, maybe it would get further.
Okay. Thank you for your evidence, gentlemen. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Senator Hanson. Gentlemen, can I thank you very much? I'm sorry I have gone over time, but I didn't want you to go. Well, we could sit here and go for hours on this, but thank you. We're safe travels, and we know where to find you should we need to follow up.
Thanks,
We'll now
Senator.
call our